"Leave before the cops come." The words slammed across the dining room like a broken plate hitting the floor. Every head turned. At the center of the storm stood a man in a royal blue suit, his chest broad, his arms folded, his face unreadable. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. The waiter's finger hovered inches from his tie, trembling with rage and arrogance. Behind the waiter, the manager in a cream suit stood with her arms crossed, her lips pursed like judgment carved in stone. A uniformed security guard lingered a few feet back, waiting for the order to drag him out. And scattered around the linen-covered tables, guests whispered, eyes wide, forks frozen midair. Some lifted their phones. One man in the corner pressed record, his camera catching every detail, the fury, the finger, the silence. The waiter leaned closer, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "This place isn't for you. Get out before we make you." The man in blue, calm, steady, unshaken, stood as if rooted to the oak floor itself. His presence filled the room without a word. He had been here before. Different city, different faces, same script. Always the same insult disguised as service. But not tonight. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below, and if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to him. The waiter's voice rose, breaking the hush of the chandeliers. "You think you can just walk in here dressed like that and we'll serve you? This is a fine dining restaurant, not a street corner. Leave now or the police will handle you." A couple near the window exchanged uneasy glances. A woman at table 7 whispered, "This feels wrong." The man beside her nodded, but neither spoke loud enough to be heard. Not yet. The manager tilted her head, a cruel half-smile on her face. "Call security," she said, though the guard was already here, shifting from one foot to the other, unsure if tonight would stain his uniform with shame. And still, the man in blue said nothing. His silence was louder than every insult hurled his way. His stillness made the air heavier, pressing against the marble walls. In the back of his mind flickered the memory of another night years ago when a maitre d' in Paris had denied him entry to a hotel lounge. Same look, same tone, same dismissal. He had walked away then, but not anymore. The waiter jabbed his finger closer, his voice cracking into a shout. "You don't belong here." The man in blue finally moved. He raised his eyes, steady as steel, and the words rolled out low, deliberate, impossible to ignore. "Be careful, this is already my house." He had walked into the restaurant 20 minutes earlier, alone. No entourage, no assistant trailing behind, no name announced at the host stand. Just a man in a tailored blue suit, a burgundy tie knotted clean against his shirt, and polished shoes that clicked softly against the hardwood floor. To the guests, he looked like any professional dining solo after a long day. To the staff, he looked like a customer they could measure, judge, dismiss, and that was intentional. His name was Marcus Hill, 42, founder of Hillstone Group, the hospitality empire that owned this very restaurant, and a dozen others across the country. The one whose capital had rebuilt this dining room, whose contracts kept the lights glowing in the chandeliers, whose signature paid the very wages of the man now yelling at him to leave. But no one here knew that tonight. Not the waiter, not the manager, not even the security guard. Marcus wanted it that way. For years, he'd walked into places like this, sometimes his, sometimes not, dressed in simplicity, watching how people reacted when they didn't recognize power. Tonight wasn't about a meal, it was about a test. The dining room shimmered with quiet wealth, crystal glasses lined in rows, silver utensils shining under soft candlelight, couples leaning close in murmured conversation. A pianist in the corner filled the space with delicate notes, a soundtrack for elegance. And into that harmony Marcus had stepped, calm as ever, taking his seat by the window. He ordered without fuss, just a glass of sparkling water to start. His voice carried authority without volume. His posture said dignity without demand. Yet to the waiter, it seemed invisible. To the manager, it looked like pretense. Their eyes didn't see a CEO. They saw a black man who didn't belong. Marcus didn't react when the waiter rolled his eyes, when the menus were dropped with a careless slap, when service slowed to a crawl while tables around him filled with bread baskets and wine. He had seen it before. Atlanta, age 24, ignored for 30 minutes until a white couple was seated after him. Chicago, age 30, told the kitchen had run out of what he ordered while another man was served the same dish across the room. Paris, age 36, denied entry to a private lounge, despite showing his reservation 3 times. Tonight was no different. And yet it was, because tonight this was his own house. He watched quietly as the waiter's irritation grew, as the manager hovered near the bar whispering, as the security guard was summoned not to protect but to intimidate. He caught the sideways glances, the raised eyebrows, the silent assumptions. Marcus folded his hands, let the silence weigh, and waited. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to explain who he was. He knew the storm would come to him, and when it did, he would not move. The first warning came quiet, barely a whisper. The waiter leaned over, dropping a single menu onto Marcus's table with a thud. "Don't waste my time," he muttered, just loud enough for nearby ears. Marcus didn't respond. He opened the menu, scanned the neat rows of entrees, and closed it again with the same calm rhythm he had carried through boardrooms worth billions. But the waiter wasn't done. He hovered, smirk tugging his lips. "Sparkling water? That's it? You think this is some casual spot? People like you usually sit at the bar." The insult hung in the air, sharp as the clink of silver against porcelain. A couple 2 tables away glanced over, frowning. One of them whispered, "Did he just say that out loud?" Marcus's hands stayed folded. He had learned long ago the power of stillness. The manager stepped in then, heels clicking against the wood like a metronome of judgment. She was tall, composed, with a clipboard tucked beneath one arm. Her eyes slid over Marcus' tie, suit, skin, and stopped cold. "Is there a problem?" she asked the waiter, though her gaze never left Marcus. "No, ma'am," the waiter said, almost pleased. "Just making sure this gentleman understands we have standards here." The manager's lips curved. "Of course, we wouldn't want confusion." The word confusion carried more than letters. It carried history, assumption, dismissal. A guest at the bar stiffened, phone slipping subtly into recording mode. Another lowered his glass, watching closely. The room's polite music had not stopped, but the tension sliced through every note. Marcus sat straighter, his silence deliberate. The waiter leaned closer, emboldened by the manager's smirk. "You can't just walk in dressed like that and expect service." Dressed like that, as if a tailored suit, polished shoes, and quiet confidence were somehow not enough. The manager crossed her arms. "If you can't provide proof of reservation, we may need to ask you to leave. We're fully booked tonight." Marcus let the words sit. Proof of reservation in a restaurant where his name was engraved on the ownership papers. He said nothing. The waiter, sensing victory, snapped his fingers toward the guard. "Stand by. This could be trouble." The guard shifted uneasily. He wasn't eager, not like the waiter, but he moved closer, posture tightening. A woman at a nearby table whispered, "This is getting ugly." Her husband nodded, but neither spoke louder. Not yet. Marcus's eyes lowered briefly, not in defeat but in patience. He remembered Chicago, remembered waiting for hours to prove he belonged in a place his own money had rebuilt. He remembered walking out, silent, carrying the weight of humiliation like a stone in his chest. Not tonight. The waiter finally raised his voice, loud enough for half the room to hear. "This isn't a free-for-all. Either show proof you belong, or get out." And with that, the air changed. The pianist's hands faltered on the keys. Glasses stopped mid-clink. Every guest knew they were witnessing something bigger than a dispute over dinner. It wasn't about food anymore. It was about dignity, and the storm was just beginning. Marcus didn't move. Not when the waiter's voice cracked against the walls. Not when the manager's arms folded tighter, chin raised like judgment from a bench. Not even when the guard's shadow fell over his table. He simply sat, shoulders squared, hands resting lightly on the linen, eyes steady as stone. The silence unnerved them. The waiter shifted, waiting for an outburst, for a protest, for anything that would justify his contempt. Nothing came. The calm in Marcus's face was sharper than any blade. "You hear me?" The waiter barked, louder this time. "Show proof or leave." No answer. The manager stepped closer, heels echoing like hammers on the wood. "Sir, refusal to comply only escalates this matter. We'll have no choice but to remove you." Marcus lifted his eyes, unhurried. For a brief moment, the room caught a glimpse of something behind that calm, a weight carried over decades, a patience carved from fire. Then he blinked, and the steel vanished back into silence. At table 6, a young man in a hoodie whispered to his date, "Why's he not saying anything?" She shook her head, phone already tilted low, recording under the tablecloth. Across the aisle, an older couple frowned. The wife muttered, "He's not doing anything wrong." The husband hushed her, uneasy with the rising tension. The guard cleared his throat, unsure. He had been in situations before: drunk patrons, angry guests, but this man didn't fit. No slurred words, no raised voice, just stillness. It made the guard's job harder. The pianist in the corner faltered again, his melody stumbling, then stopped entirely. The silence grew heavier, pressing into every corner of the room. Marcus exhaled slowly, a measured breath that said more than any argument could. He had been here before. At 26, when a teller at a bank refused to cash his check without additional verification. At 30, when a hotel concierge assumed he was a driver waiting outside, not a guest in the penthouse suite. At 38, when a board member suggested his success was luck. Each moment had taught him the same lesson: silence can be power. The waiter sneered, mistaking it for submission. "That's what I thought. Nothing to say, huh?" "Figures." A few guests exchanged glances, discomfort simmering like heat beneath the chandeliers. Someone whispered, "This isn't right." Another muttered, "Why don't they just serve him?" But no one spoke loud enough to cut through the air. Marcus's silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. Every second he didn't rise, didn't lash out, didn't give them what they wanted, it built pressure. It let the room feel the wrongness for itself. The manager's voice broke the hush. "Security, prepare to escort him out." The guard hesitated. His hand hovered near his radio, but his eyes flicked to Marcus, then to the guests watching. Something in his posture shifted reluctance, maybe even doubt. Still, Marcus said nothing. He sat as if anchored to the very foundation of the building, and in that stillness, he held the room captive. The storm outside his silence grew louder, but the man in blue, he was the calm at its center. And storms, he knew, always reveal the truth. It started with a red light. At the edge of the room, a college kid in a gray hoodie angled his phone higher, lens fixed on Marcus, on the waiter, on the tension thick enough to cut. The glow of recording painted a quiet rebellion. "Don't," Marcus said suddenly, his first word in minutes. His voice was low, calm, yet carried across the room like steel dragged across stone. "Not yet." The kid froze, startled. No one expected him to speak, let alone with that tone. He lowered the phone halfway, torn between instinct to film and respect for the man who had just spoken without raising his voice. The waiter scoffed. "Of course you don't want this filmed. Embarrassing yourself in public, yeah, I'd hide too." But the smirk faltered, because around the room, others weren't hiding anymore. At table 3, a woman in her 30s whispered to her partner, "This doesn't look right." Her partner nodded, pulling his phone from his pocket. A murmur rippled through the tables, low, restless, growing. The manager hissed, "Put those phones away. Privacy policies protect this establishment." But the words rang hollow. Everyone knew what they were really protecting wasn't privacy, it was power. Near the bar, a young server in training named Elena froze mid-step. She had watched since Marcus first sat down. She saw the way the waiter dropped the menu, the way the manager's eyes narrowed before a word was spoken, the way security was summoned before a single dish was ordered. Her hands shook around the tray she carried. She wasn't supposed to interfere. Trainees weren't even allowed to speak during escalations, but her voice cracked the silence anyway. "He didn't do anything," she said, louder than she meant to. Heads turned. The manager's glare sliced toward her like a whip. "Stay out of this, Elena." But it was too late. The words had landed. The kid with the phone raised it again, emboldened. "She's right," he muttered, this time loud enough for others to catch. "He's just sitting there." The waiter's jaw tightened. "Mind your business." But the room wasn't minding its business anymore. Guests shifted in their seats, some whispering, some shaking their heads. The unease had become collective. Marcus remained still, silent again, but this time not alone. The piano, long muted, struck a hesitant note. The music stumbled back, filling the air between voices like a fragile bridge. But it couldn't drown what had been unleashed. Elena's hands trembled, but she set the tray down firmly. "I saw his reservation on the system earlier," she added, her voice steadier now. It was valid. Gasps rose from a nearby table. The manager's face flushed red. "That's enough," she snapped. "One more word, and you're out of a job." Elena swallowed hard but didn't back down. "Then fire me. But don't lie." The room stilled again, tighter, sharper. For the first time, Marcus's lips curved, not a smile, not quite, something between gratitude and recognition. He didn't nod, didn't speak, but his eyes held Elena's for a moment, and that was enough. The tide was shifting. The storm had witnesses now. The manager's heels clicked against the wood as she advanced, each step a verdict. Her clipboard slapped against her palm like a gavel. "Enough games," she snapped. Her voice was cold, meant to slice through the murmurs spreading across the room. "You're not a paying guest. You're trespassing." Gasps rippled through the tables. Elena flinched, but Marcus didn't move. His calm sat heavy against her fury. The waiter, emboldened, stepped beside her. His smirk had returned, uglier now. "Yeah, you heard her. This table isn't free, buddy. If you can't prove you belong, get out. We've got real customers waiting." A woman near the bar whispered, "He is a customer." But her words drowned under the rising tension. The guard shifted closer. His hands flexed at his sides, restless, uncertain. The manager's voice grew sharper. "Security, remove him." The room froze. It wasn't a request. It was an order. The guard hesitated. He looked at Marcus, then at the crowd, then back to his employer. His lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came out. The waiter sneered at the hesitation. "What's the problem? Do your job." He jabbed a finger toward Marcus, his hand trembling not from fear but adrenaline. "People like him walk in here thinking they can pretend. Enough. People like him." The words cracked like thunder. Guests shifted uneasily. Someone muttered, "Did he really just say that?" Another raised their phone higher. The red recording lights multiplied across the room like sparks in the dark. Marcus stayed anchored, his silence louder than their insults. The manager's voice cut through again, brittle with authority. "This is your last chance. Show proof, or you're gone. We run a professional establishment. We don't tolerate fraud." Fraud. The accusation rang bitter, absurd. At table 4, a man in a navy suit leaned forward, frowning. "He hasn't done a thing. You're humiliating him." The waiter snapped back. "Mind your own business, unless you want to join him outside." The couple at table 4 bristled but said no more. Not yet. Elena's voice shook, but she couldn't stay silent. "Stop this. He hasn't broken any rule." The manager rounded on her, eyes blazing. "One more word and you're finished. Do you understand me?" Elena clenched her jaw. Her silence now wasn't submission. It was defiance coiled tight. The guard stepped forward at last, his shadow spilling over Marcus's table. "Sir," he said reluctantly, "I'll need you to leave." Every eye locked on Marcus. He didn't rise. He didn't argue. He simply looked at the guard, steady, calm, unshaken. And in that stillness, the weight shifted again. Because while the manager and waiter thought they were in control, the room itself was starting to turn. The witnesses weren't just watching anymore. They were judging. The air was no longer neutral. It was charged. The storm had reached its edge, and Marcus, still silent, was the calm holding it back. The waiter's patience snapped like brittle glass. He stepped closer, his finger jabbing toward Marcus's chest. "You don't belong here," he spat. The words cut across the dining room, louder than the clinking glasses, louder than the piano that had already fallen silent. "This place isn't for people like you." The room froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks hung suspended in mid-air. The insult didn't just sting Marcus, it rippled through every guest who heard it. At table 4, the woman gasped audibly. "Did he just?" Her husband shook his head, face pale, but couldn't finish the sentence. The manager didn't flinch. Instead, she folded her arms, as if the slur were policy written in stone. "Escort him out," she ordered flatly. "Now." The guard stepped forward. His hand hovered near Marcus's shoulder, hesitant but obedient. The authority of his uniform was cracking under the weight of eyes watching from every corner. Phones were up, recording, their red lights multiplying like stars against the dim glow of chandeliers. The waiter sneered, his voice rising with cruel satisfaction. "Better move before we drag you. You want the cops called? They'll love this. Fraud, trespassing, resisting. Imagine the headline." He laughed under his breath, ugly and sharp. Elena, standing by the bar, could no longer contain herself. Her voice rang clear. "Stop! He hasn't done anything wrong." The manager's head whipped toward her. "Quiet, or you're finished here." But her outburst had cracked the silence. A man at table 6 spoke up, his voice tight. "She's right. You're humiliating him in front of everyone." Another voice followed from the back. "This isn't service. This is discrimination." Murmurs built into a low chorus. The room was no longer a passive audience, it was a jury. Marcus still hadn't risen, still hadn't lifted his hands. His calm was almost unbearable now, a mirror showing the waiter and manager their own rage reflected back at them. The guard hesitated again, sweat beading at his temple. "Sir," he said, softer this time, "please don't make this harder." Marcus's gaze shifted toward him, not angry, not pleading, just steady. And that quiet stare carried more weight than any shove, any raised voice, any threat. The waiter's laughter cracked, faltering into nervous anger. "What are you waiting for?" he snapped at the guard. "Get him out!" The guard swallowed hard but didn't move. The tension was unbearable, the air charged like a storm seconds before the first strike of lightning. Then Marcus finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed his chair back not to rise and surrender, but to plant his feet firmly on the ground. He straightened his jacket with calm precision, eyes never leaving the faces before him. The room held its breath, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low but carried to every corner. "You've gone far enough." The storm had broken. The dining room was silent, waiting for the explosion that never came. Marcus stood, not hurried, not shaken, simply rising with the calm of a man who had chosen this moment long before it arrived. His phone slid from his jacket pocket with a soft gleam under the chandelier light. He tapped once, pressed it to his ear. "Activate the protocol," he said evenly. His voice didn't rise above normal conversation, yet the entire room heard it. The manager scoffed. "What is this, some act? Security, get him out now!" But the guard still didn't move. Something in Marcus's tone had clipped his authority, leaving him unsure which command truly carried weight. On the other end of the call, a crisp voice answered. "Understood, sir. Logging incident. Video feed syncing. Do you want staff credentials locked now?" The words rang through the phone's speaker. Guests nearby gasped. Phones angled higher, recording closer. The waiter's smirk wavered. What is this?" Marcus didn't answer him. His eyes stayed fixed on the manager. "You've just made a mistake. You can't walk back." Her jaw tightened. "Empty threats don't scare me. This establishment runs on rules." Marcus tilted his head slightly, as though amused. "Then let's apply them properly." From the bar, Elena whispered to herself, barely audible but still caught by a recording phone. "He's not bluffing." The manager snapped her clipboard shut, defensive now. "You're disrupting my floor. Security." But the guard had taken a small step back. His radio buzzed faintly at his side, but his hand stayed away from it. His eyes darted between Marcus and the growing circle of witnesses, unease carved into his posture. Marcus spoke again into the phone. "Document every word. Timestamp the recordings. This will go into the audit file." "Yes, sir," the voice confirmed. The waiter's bravado cracked. "Audit? What audit?" His voice pitched higher than before, strained, less certain. Marcus finally looked at him. Just one glance, steady, deliberate. The kind of look that doesn't need anger to be devastating. The one that determines whether you still work here tomorrow. A ripple moved through the room, whispers, gasps. A few quiet claps smothered under the tension. The manager tried to cut through it. "This is absurd. You don't speak for ownership. You're just another guest pushing boundaries." Marcus adjusted his cuff, calm as ever. "That's where you're wrong." He didn't say more. He didn't have to. The room was leaning, tilting toward revelation, and everyone could feel it. For the first time since the shouting began, Marcus wasn't on the defensive. He was steering, quietly, decisively, like a hand turning the rudder of a ship. The storm had a new center now, and it wasn't the waiter or the manager. It was him. The manager's laugh was sharp, brittle, desperate. "You don't speak for ownership," she repeated, louder this time, as though volume could patch the cracks spreading in her authority. "You're just another customer making noise." Marcus slipped the phone back into his pocket. His movements were slow, deliberate, each gesture carrying the weight of someone who had no need to hurry. Then he spoke. "I don't speak for ownership," he said, his tone calm, measured. "I am ownership." The words fell like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward, unstoppable. A collective gasp swept through the room. Guests glanced at one another, mouths half open, eyes wide. Phones zoomed closer, catching every syllable. The waiter blinked, his smirk collapsing into confusion. What are you talking about?" Marcus's gaze never left the manager. "My name is Marcus Hill, founder of Hillstone Group, the company that owns this restaurant, the one that signs your paychecks." The silence that followed was deafening. Elena's hands flew to her mouth. She had suspected, but hearing it confirmed out loud, in front of everyone, sent a chill through her. The guard froze in place, his authority shattered, eyes wide as if he'd just realized he'd been standing on the wrong side of history. The manager's face drained of color. Her clipboard slipped from her hand, hitting the floor with a hollow clap. That's impossible," she stammered. Marcus didn't blink. "Impossible? Look around. Every plate, every glass, every paycheck in this room runs through me. And you," his eyes locked onto the waiter, trembling now, "you decided I didn't belong in my own house." The guests erupted. Some clapped. Some shouted, "Unbelievable!" Phones lifted higher, the story already spilling across live streams and social feeds. The waiter stumbled back a step. His confidence was gone, stripped bare. I didn't know," he muttered. Marcus's voice cut through like a blade. "You didn't care." The manager tried to salvage ground. "If you really are who you say," Marcus raised a hand, silencing her without effort. "Number, you had your chance to see me, to treat me with the dignity every guest deserves. Instead, you chose arrogance, disrespect, and prejudice." The room pulsed with energy, charged and electric. Guests whispered, shook their heads, clapped louder. The young man in the hoodie leaned toward his camera. "He owns the place," he whispered, his voice trembling with awe. "He actually owns it." The revelation shifted the room's center of gravity. No longer was Marcus the target. He was the axis around which everything else spun. The waiter's face paled. The manager's authority crumbled. The guard stepped back like a soldier retreating from the wrong battlefield. And Marcus stood, calm, unshaken, power finally revealed. The storm had broken wide open. The dining room erupted, not with music, not with polite chatter, but with the raw sound of truth colliding with arrogance. A woman at table 4 clapped, sharp and deliberate. Another guest followed, then another, until the room swelled with applause that crashed against the walls like thunder. Phones were everywhere now, red dots blinking, cameras catching every twitch of panic on the staff's faces. The waiter staggered back, his confidence drained to ash. His lips moved, but no words came out. The smirk that had once curled at his mouth was gone, replaced with the wide-eyed look of a man who had stepped off a cliff without realizing it. I didn't know," he whispered again, almost pleading. His hands trembled as he looked from Marcus to the crowd. "I didn't know who he was." A man at the bar shouted back, "That's the point. You shouldn't have to know who he is to treat him with respect." Cheers erupted, the words hitting harder than any slap. The manager bent to snatch up her clipboard, but her hands shook so violently that it clattered to the floor again. She left it there. Her face, once hard and commanding, had collapsed into pale disbelief. This can't be right," she muttered, but her voice carried no authority. It was the tone of someone grasping at smoke. The guard lowered his eyes, stepping back until his shoulders brushed the wall. He wasn't guarding anything anymore. He was shrinking, retreating, hoping invisibility could shield him from accountability. Elena, standing still at the bar, felt her pulse pounding. She had spoken up, but now she stood frozen, watching the storm flip direction. And for the first time all night, she felt the possibility of justice. The young man in the hoodie raised his phone high, live streaming to hundreds, maybe thousands. The waiter told him to leave. The manager called him a fraud. And he won the restaurant. "You're all seeing this. This is real." The guests roared louder, some chanting, "Respect, respect," others shaking their heads in disbelief. The waiter turned in a circle, trapped. His voice cracked as he stammered, "I was just following procedure. I didn't mean—" But his words drowned in the noise. No one believed him now. The manager's knees buckled as she stumbled back against the counter. Her authority was gone, stripped bare in front of the very people she once commanded. "Please," she whispered, almost to herself. "This isn't how it looks." But it was exactly how it looked. The room was no longer theirs. It belonged to Marcus, to the witnesses, to the truth. And in the center of it all, Marcus stood calm, shoulders squared, the storm bending around him. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to explain. His presence, his truth, was enough to unravel every false word, every arrogant gesture, every ounce of their false authority. The collapse was complete. The only thing left was judgment. The applause died down, but the silence that followed was even louder. It wasn't empty, it was charged, heavy with expectation. Every guest in the room leaned forward, waiting for the man at the center to speak. Marcus adjusted his cufflinks, slow and deliberate. His calm was unnerving. He looked at the waiter first. The young man's hands shook, his chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. "You mocked me," Marcus said evenly. His voice was low, but it carried across the dining room as if the walls themselves wanted to hear. You pointed your finger in my face. You told me I didn't belong, in my own house. The waiter's lips quivered. I didn't mean... Marcus cut him off with a single glance. Intent does not erase impact. The guests murmured, a ripple of agreement moving through the crowd. Marcus turned his eyes to the manager. She stiffened, trying to muster a shred of authority, but her voice failed before it began. You called me a fraud, Marcus continued, his tone still calm, still unshaken. You summoned security not to protect, but to humiliate. You abused the very position entrusted to you. Her eyes darted to the guests, to the phones, to the guard, searching for rescue. None came. Marcus drew a breath, then delivered his judgment. Effective immediately, you are both terminated. The room erupted again, gasps, whispers, claps, cheers. Phones captured every word. The echo of justice caught forever in digital memory. The waiter's knees buckled. No, please, I need this job. Marcus didn't flinch. You needed integrity first. You failed. The manager's face twisted in disbelief. You can't. I can, Marcus interrupted. His voice was iron. And I just did. He reached for his phone again, tapped once. Nia, he said into the receiver, lock their credentials. Effective immediately. Terminate payroll. Flag for legal review. On the other end, his assistant's voice was crisp, professional. Understood, sir. Credentials revoked. Accounts frozen. Logged. The manager's access badge buzzed red against her hip. The waiter's earpiece clicked dead. The guard shifted uncomfortably, as though he had just watched an execution. The crowd roared, some with laughter, some with outrage, all with awe. A man at the bar shouted, "That's real power!" Another guest whispered, "Silent justice." Incredible. The waiter crumpled into a chair, head in his hands. The manager stumbled backward, pale, mute, undone. Marcus stood steady, calm, unmoved by their collapse. His eyes swept the room not in arrogance, but in quiet command. He wasn't here to gloat. He was here to set a standard. Respect, he said, his voice carrying once more. In this house, it is not optional. It is required. And the room erupted again, not in tension, not in fear, but in thunderous applause. The verdict was final. The sentence carried out. Justice had arrived, quiet and undeniable. The dining room still pulsed with energy, phones raised, applause echoing, whispers rippling like waves against marble walls. The waiter sat broken, the manager pale and mute, the guard pinned to silence by the truth of what had just unfolded. And in the center of it all, Marcus stood steady. He did not gloat, he did not smirk. He simply waited until the noise softened, until every eye and every lens locked on him again. Then he spoke. I don't need to shout, he said, his tone calm, unhurried. My presence is louder than any insult. Tonight wasn't about me, it was about dignity. And let this be clear, dignity is not negotiable. The words cut through the air, sharp and unforgettable. A murmur of approval swept the room. Someone whispered, "That's going viral." Another nodded, eyes fixed on Marcus as though witnessing not just a man, but a lesson written in flesh and bone. He straightened his jacket, the motion precise, deliberate. For too long, he continued, people like me have been told we don't belong, denied service, doubted, dismissed. But here's the truth. His gaze swept the room, catching faces frozen in awe. We never needed permission to belong. We built the house. Applause thundered again, some guests rising to their feet, clapping until palms stung. Marcus let it wash over him, not as noise but as confirmation. Then he raised his hand, and the room stilled once more. To those who watched, he said, his voice dropping low but carrying to every corner, remember this moment. Not because I own this place, but because no one should need ownership to be treated with respect. The silence that followed was electric. Then he added the final line, the one that would live long after the cameras stopped rolling. You called me a fraud in a restaurant I built. You mistook silence for submission. That was your last mistake. Gasps, cheers, phones trembling in hands as guests rushed to capture every word. Marcus turned without another glance at the broken staff. He moved toward the exit, his stride unhurried, regal, untouchable. As he reached the door, Elena caught his eye. She didn't speak, she didn't need to. He gave her the faintest nod, gratitude wrapped in silence. The doors opened. The night air swept in, and Marcus Hill walked out, leaving the storm behind him resolved, finished, a story the world would now tell. Inside, applause followed him into the street, echoing like justice itself.